Hey, folks. One of our sponsors today is the maker of a simple but really meaningful gift for a relative, let's say, or a grandparent or a parent or, I don't know, a sister who lives across the country or maybe not even fully across the country, just far from home. A digital picture frame from Aura. It's the perfect gift to share pics of all things they can't be there for. Family vacations, somebody's graduation, maybe a birthday party at a laser tag place that happened on Friday. Yes. In fact, just loading up some pictures. Now, my son does not really allow pictures to be taken of him, but sometimes I sneak a couple in, and then sometimes I actually upload them. Trying to upload, I'm going to see if I can do a slow-mo of him basically with a 4-inch vertical jump to grab a helium balloon that was on the top of her. It doesn't matter. The point is, this is a great gift. It comes with unlimited storage, comes with simple controls on the frame. You can upload as many photos as you want, and your receiver can, whether it's your mom or your grandparent, your aunt, or your sister, can pick the perfect one. It was named the #1 digital frame by Wirecutter, The Strategist, and Wired. It's super easy. You can actually set it up for them and then just give it to them. You can even put in their Wi-Fi password. So it's just literally plug and play for some of the more technically challenged. Right now, you can save on the perfect gift that keeps on giving by visiting auraframes.com. For a limited time, listeners can get $20 off their best-selling frame with the code MAJORITY. That's AURA frames.com, promo code MAJORITY. Terms and conditions apply. And now for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, March 11th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Dr. Peter J. Hotez, Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine, author of The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, A Scientist's Warning. Meanwhile, over the weekend, Joe Biden draws a red line for Israel at an attack on Rafah. And then, within 24 hours, Netanyahu says he will blow through that line. U.S. airdropped aid packages reportedly kills 5. As the U.S. announces details of establishing a temporary aid port. Sweden and Canada restart payments to UNRWA. This, as UNRWA claims some workers were coerced into falsely claiming involvement in the October 7th attack on Israel. In Washington, a partial government shutdown averted, the $460 billion spending bill now on to the other potential shutdown. The other potential partial shutdown. 24 progressive organizations line up to defend progressive incumbents against the huge money AIPAC attacks. And Senator Katie Britt's disastrous State of the Union response is actually getting worse. A Trump-appointed Texas federal judge blocks the National Labor Relations Board joint employer rule. U.S. opens criminal inquiry into Boeing. And U.S. Marines evacuate the U.S. Embassy in Haiti. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. Emma is out for 2 more days, three including today. She is on holiday. She shall return rested and relaxed, hopefully for her sake. And want to wish many of you Ramadan Mubarak. Ramadan started 2 days ago? Today? No, yesterday. Where Muslims will, it was yesterday, will fast from sun up to sundown. And, I've been engaged in something.
I was going
like
to say,
that
speaking
last
of
week.
fasting.
Well, actually, oddly, we got the ad today for it, so I will talk about that in a bit. But last night was the Oscars, and I got to be honest, I don't really pay that much attention to the Oscars. I forgot about it. I wanted to have Matthew Film Guy on so that we could not talk about it.
Wow.
And I
That's a
totally
big oversight.
I totally forgot about it. But maybe we can have him on this weekend, Friday, to talk about a retrospect. The films that were, I was at dinner last night and with somebody who, sort of follows this stuff now and, or still does. And she went through the films that were there. And I was like, oh, these are actually better films than I remember. Most often, very often the Oscars are just garbage. But I had seen actually a bunch of these movies. I still don't even know the entire list, but Poor Little Things, saw that in the theater actually, and Zone of Interest I had seen, and I don't know, a couple others. I didn't see Oppenheimer. That one probably won all the awards, or the other big movies. But I had seen Zone of Interest. I liked it. I thought it was interesting, and I would have minded more sort of understanding of the characters a little bit. But I think part of the idea was really trying to tell an idea more than it was like character study per se. But it is a film that, and I believe it was shot over an extended period of time, but about the commandant, and it was based on a book of
A novel by Martin Amis, released in 2014.
yeah, and that novel was sort of like a historical novel of what's his face, Hess, Rudolf Hess, who was the commander of the commandant, I guess, of the Auschwitz death camp. And it sort of tells the story, but it really is more of a almost like an ethnography of what a family who of a commandant living right outside the wall of Auschwitz, what their daily life is like. And how it is that they manage to sort of avoid the idea that they are living next to a death camp and that their dad goes to work every day to oversee a death camp. And this guy, Jonathan Glazer, well-known filmmaker from Britain, made films like Sexy Beast and others, and he won. I guess they won Best International Film at the Oscars, and Glazer gave this speech, and it was at first misreported and almost like blatantly misconstrued. You will note that he stands up there and says that as we resent or refute our Jewishness and the Holocaust, being used for. But apparently, I think it was the Hollywood Reporter or somebody, or Variety, ended the quote at, "We refute our Judaism and our Jewishness and the Holocaust, period," as opposed to, "We refute the fact that the Jewishness and the Holocaust is being invoked to justify the slaughter in Gaza." But here is the speech.
All our choices were made to reflect and confront us in the present, not to say, look what they did then, rather look what we do now. Our film shows where dehumanization leads at its worst. It shaped all of our past and present. Right now, we stand here as men who refute their Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation which has led to conflict for so many innocent people. Whether the victims of October the 7th in Israel or the ongoing attack on Gaza, all are victims of this dehumanization. How do we resist? Alexandra Bistron Kaladziejczak, the girl who glows in the film as she did in life, chose to. I dedicate this to her memory and her resistance. Thank you.
Pretty poignant, I thought, particularly from a guy who's just made a very important movie about the Holocaust, and really about how something like that happens. How, sort of an awareness and if there is anything that I think is sort of marks what's going on in Gaza, is the capacity of a large swath of people, whether it's here in this country or in Israel, to disassociate themselves from the humanity of the people who are suffering there.
Yeah. The scene that I take away from reading the novel 10 years ago is a domestic scene, and people smell something, and some of them know that it's crematoria and some don't, but everyone's wondering about what that smell is.
And I don't know if that really came up in the film. I don't recall that, but there is a certain quality of middle class, upper middle class people who are just ambitious, and it being corporate, and this idea of we got a job to do, and we want to have a nice life for ourselves, and this is part of it. All right. In a moment, we're going to be talking to Dr. Peter Hotez. He's the Dean for National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine and author of The Deadly Rise of Anti-Scientists, a scientist's warning on what is almost 3 years to the day, 4 years to the day. Wow. When at least they shut down the New York City schools, and a lot of people were basically began the COVID era in earnest. But first, a couple of words from our sponsors. We mentioned fasting. Last week, I don't know if people realize this, but I was on a 5-day fast. And it wasn't a full-on fast. I've been reading about the benefits of fasting. Part of it is weight loss, but part of it is also longevity, which I've got, and also what it does for your mental and physical performance, your gut health. But that's something that is, a little bit intimidating. Well, this product Prolon was created to make that a lot less intimidating. Prolon is a revolutionary plant-based nutrition program that nourishes the body while making cells believe they're fasting. So it's sort of it's like fasting, but you do it with some food.
With a cheat. Yeah.
And it was researched and developed for decades at the University of Southern California Longevity Institute, backed by leading U.S. medical centers. Prolon helps promote healthy blood sugar, support cardiovascular health, and reduce abdominal fat. Abdominal fat is really sort of problematic. The belly fat stuff is not good for you. But Prolon is not a diet. Prolon is science. It is science based on the Nobel Prize winning discoveries in medicine. And it all starts with the Prolon 5-day program, which is what I did. tiny snacks, tiny soups, and beverages that are designed to keep your body in a fasting state. So by like day 4 or 5, like I read into this stuff. I don't have it all right in the forefront of my head, but in day 4 or 5, there's some like cellular stuff that happens that is very different than the first couple of days. And I lost a couple of pounds. But the thing that really amazed me is that except for one day when I was a little bit crabby, I felt pretty good. I had a lot of energy last week. I still have some of it actually, but and I made it all the way through. I stopped it a couple hours early because it was Saul's birthday party. So I cheated them, but it was like I didn't have a headache. I was a little tired at the end of the day, but that was good. I got more sleep.
What you want.
Yep. Right now, Prolon is offering the Majority Report with Sam Seder listeners 10% off their 5-day nutrition program. Go to prolonlife.com/majority. It's really easy because you get basically one box. That's what you do that day. Give it a try. prolonlife.com/majority. You'll get 10% off. Also, today's program sponsored in part by Nutrafol, which allows you to not have to choose between better hair growth and your health. Nutrafol provides a whole body health approach for men that promotes healthier hair. No drugs, no compromises, just healthier hair. I've talked about this a couple of times. Experiencing a little like thinning, up here. I mean, it happens to everybody, but I figure why not get out ahead of it? And so that's what I did. I've been taking Nutrafol now probably for close to a year, and it has like the thinning has reduced on this side. I don't know why I was getting on. I can't even tell anymore. This side of my head, and it has reduced it. And the Nutrafol's got these hair growth supplements. They are physician formulated. They use 100% drug-free ingredients. The patented technology provides consistent, reliable results without compromising your sex life. Can confirm to the extent that happens.
Mighty man of valor.
Many supplements rely and this is the other thing with Nutrafol. They don't just test the ingredients. Nutrafol clinically tests the final formulations so that they know they're effective. In a clinical study, 84% of men showed improvement in their hair after 6 months after taking Nutrafol's men's hair growth supplements. Head over to Nutrafol.com/men, take their hair wellness quiz. It'll give you a personalized hair health plan based upon your specific root causes, no pun intended. With Nutrafol, building a hair growth routine is simple. You purchase online. There's no prescription necessary. You don't need a doctor's visit. Free shipping, automated delivers. Ensure you'll never miss a day. You can see results in 3 to 6 months. Nutrafol, #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand. Over 1 million people seeing thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding. Take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men. Enter the promo code TMR. Find out why over 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com/men, spelled Nutrafol.com/men. Enter the promo code TMR. That's Nutrafol.com/men, promo code TMR. Okay. Quick break. We come back. Dr. Peter Hotez. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland is out today. I want to welcome to the program Dr. Peter J. Hotez, Dean for the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine, and author of The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, A Scientist's Warning. Doctor, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sam.
So this is actually at least your second book, and really the sort of like the second book, and where you've had to weigh in on the question of vaxxers or anti-vax or vaccine hesitancy, and I'm struck by the fact that like very different eras. Books that were written like 6 years apart, but very different eras within this movement. Tell us the context of your first book and how that came about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things I do, I like to write about a little bit about the geopolitics of infectious diseases, in addition to being a vaccine scientist. And the way I got involved with going up against the anti-vaccine movement and dealing with people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., et cetera, was I have 4 adult kids, including Rachel, who has autism and intellectual disabilities. And the first book I wrote, which was called Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, to counter the original assertion against vaccines that started in the early 2000s with false claims that vaccines cause autism, and that made me public enemy number 1 with anti-vaccine groups, or public enemy number 1 or 2, but it also gave me a front row seat to watch how it evolved, and put me up against an interesting cast of characters, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The change was that it continued to accelerate. A lot of these anti-vaccine groups started monetizing the internet. They were selling phony autism cures and nutritional supplements. And if you go to Amazon.com and type in the words vaccination in the book section, all you get is anti-vaccine conspiracy books. So it became first a multi-million, maybe multi-hundreds of $1 million industry. And then I think for me, the big game changer was about even before the pandemic, it started to be adopted by the political right, which at one level made absolutely no sense, but at another level it did. It around this concept of health freedom, medical freedom. Hey, you can't tell us what we want to do with our kids. And it began in California, but it really scaled up where I am in Texas, and it got adopted actually by the Republican Tea Party in Texas, and started getting PAC money, Political Action Committee money, funding anti-vaccine groups. In fact, a big anti-vaccine group formed their own Political Action Committee, PAC, supporting candidates to run on anti-vaccine platforms. And that's when you started to see it become enmeshed in Republican Party politics. It also got to be harder and harder for me to talk about, because I'll just say one last thing, which is that, my training as a scientist or a physician says you're not supposed to talk about Republicans and Democrats and liberals or conservatives or red states and blue states. So it's very uncomfortable for me to do it, but I feel like it's important to save lives. And so, I just haven't found a way, Sam, to talk about it other than to talk about it. So I talk about it, or I write about it, even though it's a scary place for me at times.
Well, and I think, it's it's just not your arena. It's not the arena of scientists, and there's a sort of like in many respects a market disadvantage. I find this also within the context of the education sphere too, because you're going up against forces that have a slogan, and you're talking about stuff that is nuanced and much harder to communicate. But we will.
All of a sudden, I've got Steve Bannon publicly calling me a criminal on his Truth Social website and this kind of stuff. It's so bizarre.
I should say, full disclosure, I think the audience, most of the audience knows this, but I used to work with RFK Jr. On the radio, and there was a couple occasions in the past. This was, closer to 10 years ago now, where we would have a conversation about vaccines, and I started doing this show about 20 years ago, and at that time, was still in the wake of that Lancet article that ended up getting pulled about the correlation, at least, between vaccinations and autism. And there was a theory around in like the early aughts that maybe it was thimerosal.
That's
but
right.
Thimerosal. So walk us through that, because
So
in 2004, I remember doing an interview about it, and the person saying, like, we've got a year or two more to see if the removal of thimerosal is going to have any type of implications, and it ultimately didn't. But walk us through that first era.
Oh, you're absolutely right. So it became kind of this kind of pyrrhic game of whack-a-mole, or moving the goalposts. So every time anti-vaccine groups would make an assertion, the scientific community would spend a lot of funding and support to refute, to show it wasn't the case, and find evidence that it wasn't the case, and then they come up with something else. So the original assertion, you're absolutely right, in the late 1990s, a paper was published in The Lancet, a prestigious British medical journal, by Andrew Wakefield and his colleagues, claiming that it was the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, the MMR vaccine, the live virus replicated in the gut, and somehow that led to, at that time, it was called pervasive developmental disorder, or autism. And the scientific community responded. First of all, the study was shown not to be true. Second, the scientific community responded with big cohort studies showing the kids who got the MMR vaccine were no more likely to acquire autism than kids who didn't, at some fair amount of expense. Then Robert F. Kennedy Jr. came along in 2005, and you're absolutely right. He wrote an article in that very important biomedical journal, the Rolling Stone, saying that it was the thimerosal preservative, also published in Salon. And again, the scientific community did large cohort studies, even non-human primate study, showing that thimerosal was not doing that. And then, so that article was retracted by either Salon or Rolling Stone. I can't remember which, but then it was the other magazine followed along. And then it was Jenny McCarthy and Jim Carrey came along and said, we're spacing vaccines too close together. We have to green our vaccines, or some nonsense like that. And then it was alum vaccines. And then it was HPV vaccine for cervical cancer, another cancer. They claimed it was causing infertility or autoimmunity. And then Robert F. Kennedy Jr. came back again and said it was causing something called chronic illness. And it became this really exhausting exercise. But we did it. I mean, the scientific community did it, and the data is sound. But the other part of the narrative is, we know now what autism is and how it begins in early fetal brain development through the action of autism genes. A lot of them are neuronal cytoskeleton genes involved in neuronal connections. We actually did whole exome genomic sequencing on my daughter Rachel with my wife Ann and I, and found Rachel's autism genes. And there's a fantastic paper that came out of Stanford Medical School last year showing, using brain organoids with neurons that have those autism genes, how they're migrating differently. So it's a very complete story. It still hasn't gone away. I mean, that thread is still around, and you see
the autism
people,
thread.
Yeah, still the people resurrected, but I think we've taken a lot of wind out of that sail. The problem is the anti-vaccine groups needed to reinvent themselves, and the way they did it was by enmeshing themselves in Republican Party politics. And I think for the anti-vaccine groups, it was a way to get new relevance and funding. And I think for the extremist end of the GOP, it was a way to get a ready-made group of adherents, to buy into all the other stuff. So I think it was mutually reinforcing for them. And that's when it became a political movement. And that's when it became so dangerous during COVID, because it spilled over into COVID-19 vaccines, which is the subject of the book.
And I just want to touch on this too, in terms of this development, because I distinctly remember too, the HPV vaccine, the biggest concern I heard, which was, this is going to make children more promiscuous. I mean, that was deployed by the right at that time, in whatever it was, like 2005 or 6, I think, when this was just being developed, that by giving, a 12-year-old or 13-year-old girl this shot, it wasn't so much that there was a fear of the vaccine as the vaccine functioning as a license to go have sex.
It was both. It was all of those things, and it was so unfortunate, because now in Australia they actually have a plan, Sam, to eliminate cervical cancer by the year 2030 or 2035. They're going to wipe out cervical cancer in the nation of Australia, the continent of Australia. We're going in the wrong direction. we're actually unnecessarily condemning a whole generation of girls and women to cervical cancer. I mean, it's so tragic.
So, all right. So you describe it as a marriage of convenience. Is there also an ideological value to the right? I mean, the Republican Party picks up on these things, obviously, from an opportunistic standpoint, but the attacks on science have been embedded in the conservative movement, going back to Gertrude Himmelfarb, in the idea of like, if we can, it's two-part. If we can, say there is no, science is problematic in the sense that there's a certain objective reality to it. And if we can sort of disabuse of that, then we can make everything based upon a values, moral judgment, and we are better off fighting on that terrain. And then two, particularly when it comes to vaccines, we are talking about public health. And the idea of public health is each one of us owes a responsibility to the person next to us on some level, because we're all part of a society. And that is the sort of like, and then that also, you can see it reflected in the policy decisions that need to be made from a strong sort of like a state when it comes to issues of public health.
Yeah, I think it's so. You touched on about 5 or 6 points there, all interconnected, and it takes a little bit to unpack and unravel. So you're right. I think part of it is part of the larger context is an attack on the so-called elites or the intelligentsia, and scientists are part of that. They're intellectuals, and so there's that piece of it. I think, going along with public health, that requires, that's right, cooperation between people and butt up against these concept of health freedom, medical freedom. I think that had a big piece to it. And so what happened was it got adopted as part of the canon, along with, the 2020 election was stolen and Putin over Ukraine. And somehow this became then part of it. But the difference was, by adopting this, it became a killing force, because in the book I point out that 200,000 Americans, 200,000, including 40,000 people in my state of Texas, needlessly perished because they refused a COVID vaccine during the Delta and BA1 Omicron waves in 2021, 2022, after safe and effective vaccines became widely available. And I benchmark it at the start of this. It's actually a kind of a post-Trump phenomenon. I benchmark it at the start of the CPAC conference of conservatives in Dallas in 2021, very much that health freedom rhetoric. First, they're going to vaccinate you, then they're going to take away your guns and your Bibles, and as that quote unquote is, and as ridiculous as that sounds to us, people accepted it. So what they did was, in their zeal to push up against vaccine mandates, they went the next step and actively sought to discredit the effectiveness and safety of vaccines. So the Associated Press report on that conference at the time was called "They Clapped at Death of COVID." They're actually clapping for people not getting vaccinated. And then you saw the pile-on. It was the members of the House Freedom Caucus, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and calling people like me medical brown shirts, starting comparing vaccines to the Holocaust, which was so incredibly offensive, or Jim Jordan of Ohio, or Senator Rand Paul started doing this. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin held these vaccine injury roundtables. And then, very important, it was amplified every night on Fox News. And this was documented by two groups, by Media Matters for America, and also a research group out of the Federal University of Science and Technology in Zurich, Switzerland, documented every night. Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity filled their nighttime broadcasts in 2021 as the Delta wave was accelerating with anti-vaccine content. So, people went down that rabbit hole, and as a sign of allegiance to it, didn't get vaccinated, and they paid for it with their lives on an unprecedented scale. And that's why I'm so passionate about talking about this, because now I feel it's, for me, I developed low-cost vaccines. We made a COVID vaccine for India and Indonesia, reached 100 million people. We have a new human hookworm vaccine. But now, being a vaccine scientist, now making vaccines is the first part. The second part is trying to way to counter all this anti-vaccine activism, because that is also now a killing force in the United States.
Well, we probably played I don't know how many of those clips of folks on Fox and also online. You know, the more online, the Rogans and the
But
and the
the
other
point is,
right wingers.
that's right. But the point is, it's a whole ecosystem. You know, we too often
Totally.
we call it this, you know, misinformation or infodemic, like it's just some random junk out there. But it's not that. It's, as you point out, it's an organized, well-financed, and predatory movement that killed people.
And very and entrepreneurial. I mean, that's it is you know, there are I can name you 3 or 4 YouTubers right off the top of the bat where I can show you just with a graph as to when they started to sort of like carry this anti-vax mantle and how it helped their numbers in many respects. But when you cite 40,000 in Texas, 200,000, will you just explain to people the methodology in which you come up with that number, just so that, like, you know, we can address these type of things? I mean, I think for many people it's obvious, but will you just like,
and it's actually not only my estimates, because a group at the Chan Harvard School of Public Health has come up with this. They're all between 200 and 300,000 numbers. So my 200,000 number may be a little on the conservative side. So Harvard Chan came up with a similar number. Kaiser Family Foundation did. Charles Gaba, the health analyst for ACA signups, came up with this. Came up with 180,000 to 230,000, but they all kind of come around 200,000 plus. It's based on the continued rise of vaccinations after vaccines became widely available in March and April of 2021, and the fact that 85% of the deaths, 85% of the deaths were among unvaccinated individuals, people who weren't getting vaccinated, number one. And so that's the number. But the other really important part is overwhelmingly those deaths among the unvaccinated were occurring in red states, red being Republican, blue being Democrat, and the numbers from Charles Gaba and confirmed by New York Times and Axios and National Public Radio show that the redder the county, the higher the percentage of Republican voters, the lower the immunization rate and higher the death rate. So much so that David Leonhardt of the New York Times just called it red COVID, because that was the reality. And you could see it firsthand. I mean, if I go into more conservative areas of Texas, like in East Texas or Central Texas, essentially everyone you talk to has lost a loved one because they've refused a COVID vaccine. That's where you really start to hear it and see it.
What are the responses? Like, I know, I know, I spent some time, you know, in upstate New York, a fairly rural area, and I know a couple of families who basically the same thing. They're Fox News viewers. They were determined not to get the vaccine, and they lost a member of the family. You know, and in that instance, in my experience, people were, for the most part, like, they went out and they got vaccinated, and some of them were almost evangelical about it afterwards. At the same time, I also know some folks up there who are vehemently anti-vax.
Yeah, it varied. I mean, you had people on their deathbeds in the ICU, you know, saying COVID was a hoax as their last dying words. I mean, so they weren't even dying with dignity, all the way to people who say, okay, now I'm ready to get vaccinated, doc, you know, but that's not how vaccines work. You can't wait till you're in the ICU dying of COVID. It's preventative, not therapeutic. All the way to those, you know, who say, don't do what I did, you know, go out and get vaccinated. But the responses were quite variable, but all tragic in their own way. And that's one of the things that I say is, you know, these were victims. These are, you know, amazing people, good people. You know, one of the things that I gave medical grand rounds at Stanford not long ago, and after I'd given medical grand rounds at University of Texas Tyler, which is a new medical school in East Texas, very conservative, and I said, you know, quite honestly, if my car had broken down because of a flat tire, and you gave me the choice for that car to break down in Palo Alto, California, where Stanford is, or Tyler, Texas, I'd pick Tyler every time, because people would be fighting over who's going to help you change your tire. Right. And so these were extraordinary people who were targeted by the Fox News anchors, the Murdoch family targeted by members of the House Freedom Caucus, 2 U.S. senators, and it's terrible. And there doesn't seem to be any accountability for it. That's the other. I mean, there's no autocorrection here. It's not, usually in the past, if parents, because I'm also trained as a pediatrician, and in the past, if parents weren't vaccinating their kids and enough parents weren't vaccinating, there was a breakthrough infection like measles. Word would get around the kids were being hospitalized for measles, sometimes in the ICU, and that would be a self-correcting mechanism. Parents would go out and get vaccinated. I'm not seeing that now. I'm seeing this kind of doubling down, and you saw what the Florida Surgeon General has done now with measles, not telling people to get vaccinated. And what you're seeing actually is this revisionist history coming out now out of the members of Congress. They're trying to say, no, it was the COVID vaccines that killed Americans, not the COVID virus, which is ridiculous, or that the scientists invented the virus. And this is playing out now in the GOP-led House hearings, the COVID subcommittee. They literally say on their Twitter site, it says, we're going to sell popcorn, quote unquote, not even pretending this is anything other than political theater, and parading prominent American scientists in front of C-SPAN cameras to humiliate them. It's just awful.
And all right, I want to address some of that, of sort of like some of those belief systems. One of the things that I think sort of like makes it easier, but I don't know what the answer to this is, that makes it easier for these folks to sort of like create this, this shadowy sort of like, backstory behind vaccines is the existence of the vaccine court, which is a court that is sort of outside of our typical judiciary system. It is one that awards, because there is immunity for, typical tort actions against vaccines. It awards people who have been injured by vaccinations, compensation for that outside of the system. And the reason is because, this is the nature, again, of, and correct me if I'm wrong, of public health, is that the decisions that are being made here are the same sort of like cost benefit analysis you'll make when you go in for any type of treatment for yourself. The doctor says to you, nothing's 100% sure. There is 80%, chance that if we do this procedure, it's going to improve your back or whatever it is that you're doing. And they can't say 100% because nothing's 100%. Vaccines are no different in that regard. It's inevitable that there's going to be some people who are injured by vaccines, but the number of injured people is going to be far, far less than in the absence of the vaccines. And this, conceptually, this is, I think, like, it's an easy concept to be manipulated.
That's right. I think you're right. I think, the truth is with these vaccine courts, one of the reasons they did it was to actually, it's actually in the plaintiff's favor. The bar to show evidence that you've been injured through a vaccine is far lower in a vaccine court than it would be in a real court. So it actually works more or less on behalf of the parents better than anything else. But you're right. There's all this weaponization by the anti-vaccine group. Same with the VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting
Well, I was going to
System,
ask you about that. Like,
which is a passive
I don't hear
system.
people talk about that anymore. Like, I remember, every day we would hear the number 40,000, VAERS things. And VAERS, of course, is just sort of, it's basically a tip line. Not it's all unverified.
That's right. And it's used because it's very sensitive, but very non-specific. So it can pick up and it works in the sense that it picks up rare events like rare myocarditis after mRNA vaccines or thrombotic thrombocytopenia events after the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. And that's why it's set up, but it's not meant to be causal. In other words, that's to generate hypotheses. That's to see, let's see if there's a link. But there's 4 or 5 other parallel systems that are in place, like Vaccine Safety Data Link at CSIA, to actually verify whether any of those things are actually true. But again, what the anti-vaccine groups do is they weaponize that and just say everything that's in VAERS is causally related, which it's not. Now, the other problem with this, of course, is the pharma companies don't generate a lot of love and affection. I mean, after what does Pfizer and Moderna do after taking $25 billion in U.S. taxpayer money for the mRNA vaccines, either for development costs or for advanced purchase? They respond by jacking up the price to $130 a dose. I mean, you want to say to them, guys, have you no situational awareness? I mean, do you want the American people to hate you? And
well, they don't care.
They don't
honestly,
care. Yeah,
they're just going to make money hand over fist. The real problem is that when we gave them that $25 billion, we should have had some strings attached. Is really what it comes
including the fact that there was no strings attached on how they communicate. So they would send out these press releases. And I mean, I was going crazy into 2020, beginning of 2021. They'd send out these press releases. You know, when the company sends out a press release, it's not meant for you or for me. It's meant for the shareholders to jack up the stock prices, right? And so what they were doing was spectacularizing their accomplishment. And they made it seem like these mRNAs were miracles that had popped out of nowhere because they're such amazing companies. And it was tone deaf to the fact that, you know, those vaccines built on 10, 15 years of research from our group, for instance, showing how you deliver the spike protein, why the spike protein's a target, how you can use pieces of the spike protein. And that's what led to our COVID vaccines for low-cost COVID vaccines for in India and Indonesia, or the discovery of mRNA as a vaccine that came out of the University of Pennsylvania that won the Nobel Prize. That was 20 years of work that went into that. But by omitting all of that info, which is about the right time frame for it takes to develop a vaccine, but by omitting all of that, that actually frightened people. And again, it was tone deaf to any understanding of vaccine hesitancy, and took a lot of damage control from people like me and everyone else. But it was hard to do that.
Looking forward, I want to ask about some of those questions around, you know, that around those sort of like the policy decisions associated with this, because in addition to the sort of excess deaths that we had there, in addition to like now we start to see measles outbreaks here and there and this and that, one of the things that I think is really most concerning is next pandemic. If we haven't traveled at least several generations until the next pandemic, it feels like we're going in at a massive disadvantage from a public health perspective. Do you think that there is, to the extent that there is a medical institution within the context of our government, the people who are sort of like, you know, ostensibly will address this from a policy standpoint, do they have a different understanding of what the relationship should be if they ever did like an Operation Warp Speed again with the vaccine makers? Because and I want to speak a little bit more in just a moment about what you did, because and other attempts to make a sort of like a more open source version of the vaccines, but do you think that there's a greater understanding within the government institutions as to like next time maybe we got to say, we're going to fund this. We're going to guarantee that we're going to buy it, even if it doesn't work a certain amount of it, so that you're covered, your risk, your downside is covered. But we're also going to limit your upside so that we can sort of both maintain trust with the citizens of this country and also make what we help develop more widely available.
Yeah, I mean, it goes like this. I mean, Operation Warp Speed in many respects was a resounding success. I mean, my friend Alison Galvani is a professor at Yale School of Public Health, did the estimates and basically says those mRNA vaccines saved 3 million American lives, right? So if it wasn't for those mRNA vaccines, we would have had over 4 million deaths instead of 1 million deaths. So that's extraordinary. But at the same time, I think part of the problem was it was so, the way it was set up and the way the contracts were done was exclusively a pharma deal. And it didn't have to be that way. They could have gone with groups like ours and had some low cost options that would have worked just as well using older technology that where people trusted, because it's the same technology used as the recombinant protein hepatitis B vaccine that everyone's already given their kids. So I think, by only focusing on the pharma companies, I think that was probably not wise. that we should have enlarged. They should have enlarged the tent somewhat, because I still get emails all the time saying, "Hey doc, I'm not taking that mRNA vaccine despite what you say, but I'll take your vaccine because I'll trust it more." But we don't have a mechanism even to get it into the U.S. So I think that part needs to be fixed. So there were a lot of good lessons learned from Operation Warp Speed, a lot of positive, a lot of lives saved. But we need to find a way to, one, broaden the tent, and two, limit the pharma communications. There should have been some constraints on what they could say in their press releases, because I think that did a lot of damage. But then again, even if everything were perfect, right, you'd still have a very aggressive anti-vaccine movement out there. And I think that's the one that everyone is really trying to figure out. How do you tamp that down? Because it's not, I mean, I think the health sector knows what to do at this point, because it's a political enterprise linked very much to GOP politics. And so it will likely require a political solution without any obvious answers about how to begin doing that.
Well, is one of those, I mean, I want to talk about the different political solutions that you see, but is one of them I mean, it seems to me, because from watching your interactions with, whether it was like with Rogan and RFK Jr. or just the claims that aren't necessarily directed at you, but more broadly speaking, this was just a money grab, some variant of COVID was fake. And so that gave them an excuse to make the vaccine, which was just a way that they make billions of dollars. You develop a vaccine that you did not make billions of dollars off of. You will not make billions of dollars off of, but probably saved, I don't know how many millions upon millions of people's lives around the globe. It was low cost. If we as a political entity had basically said, like, we're going to cap your profits on this. You're going to make some money, but we're going to cap it. We're going to 10% or whatever. You're not going to have to put out notices to your shareholders because we can put the notice out right here. You're going to get 10% profits. I mean, that to me seems like a big political reform that could be made in that instance that would at the very least take one arrow out of their quiver when they start to talk about this stuff. Like, because the profit motive is not, it's not an absurd theory to have. If, you follow, and I go down to, I do a tort conference twice a year, and a lot of that has to do with medical devices. And then you get discovery and you find out, well, they knew there was some problems here about pushing it off label or this and that. Like, pharmaceutical companies do not have a great reputation in some respects about, not trying to maximize profits, sometimes at the expense of safety. And so, it seems to me if you take out the profit, the massive profit factor, there's one less reason to be suspicious.
Everything you say is true, but with one asterisk, and the asterisk is many of the pharma companies would counter in saying, we don't really have to be in the vaccine space. We can do much better with another Ozempic Me Too compound. Rather than embarking on all the complexities of making a vaccine. And so what they tend to do is, hang the sort of Damocles over everything and say, look, if you don't make it interesting enough for us, we don't really have to be in the vaccine space. It's a certain amount of noblesse oblige with that. And it's partly true, partly not true as well. I mean, they're crying all the way to the bank, right? Pfizer and Moderna made a ton of money on those deals. So the argument is, if you make it less lucrative for them, then maybe they'll not weigh in this time. What's interesting that you notice is that the traditional big players in the vaccine space were not in on COVID-19, right? Merck & Company was not a part of things. GlaxoSmithKline was not a part of things. Sanofi was not a part of things. The ones who were in were those who, Pfizer, has had some history with vaccines, not as much. Moderna was brand new, et cetera. So this was a way for them to get into the vaccine space, and so that and maybe to accelerate a new technology. So there were other gains there as well.
What do you think about what happened with the Gates Bill Gates's involvement and basically convincing, I think it was the University of Oxford to rather than allow its so-called intellectual property to be more open source, but to sort of lock it up a little bit. What's your take on that? Your perspective?
You know, I don't have the inside baseball on that one, but what I can tell you is this: you know, when we were trying to get our low-cost recombinant protein vaccine out there, nobody was rushing to help us. I mean, we had to raise money locally here in Texas, which we were able to do through. That's one of the blessings of being in a place like the Texas Medical Center. There's, you know, as opposed to being a professor at Penn or Columbia or Harvard, which is basically a hunting license to write grants, you know, you can raise money in if you have to, if you've got a really exciting idea here in Texas. So we were able to get money from the King Ranch, the Clayburgh Foundation, the Dunn Foundation, MD Anderson Foundation. Tito's Vodka gave us $2 million, which was, not that I'm endorsing alcohol consumption, but should you have a vodka containing cocktail this evening, you definitely want to go with Tito's. So that was great. But the fact that I had to do that was, you know, unfortunate, right? I mean, it should have been a much easier path to do something like developing a low-cost COVID vaccine for the world.
And you could not have gotten into something like warp speed. It was not in any way.
We could not get it. We tried. We could not get on their radar screen. We weren't basically the thinking was, unless you're a big pharma company, you don't have the chops to pull this off. And that was the end of the discussion. And there's still very much that mindset in the vaccine space that I'm trying to work. Again, and what I say, it's not to demonize the pharma companies. They do what they do. They provide a lot of vaccines for global health, for what's called the Gavi Alliance, Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, but broaden the tent, broaden the ecosystem to give other players a chance because, and especially with partnering with vaccine producers in low and middle income countries. The other thing they did was they all went for brand new technologies, mRNA, particle vaccines. And when you do that, even though you advance the science and you get a lot of interesting new vaccine technologies, as any engineer will tell you, there's a learning curve before you can go from 0 to 15 billion doses that were needed when you use a brand new technology. So what happened was predicted and predictable. They made just enough to be bought up by North American countries, US and Canada and Western Europe, and that left all the low and middle income countries out in the cold. And that's when we were getting frantic phone calls from ministers of health and ministers of science in low and middle income countries because they knew we were working on coronavirus vaccines for 10 years or more. And they said, can you help us? So we did what we could. We transferred the technology with no patent. We would send our production cell bank by World Courier to these countries and work with them on scale it up. And it worked. We got 100 million people immunized. So that was very, very exciting. But the whole system should have functioned better. There should have been somebody with that situational awareness to say, you know, if we go with all brand new technologies, or what I sometimes call all brand new shiny new toys exclusively, it's going to leave the low and middle income countries out in the cold. Nobody had that situational awareness to say, well, maybe we should have a technology that could be compatible with vaccine producers that are in low and middle income countries. There's about 40 of them that band together and call themselves the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturers Network. And that's where we came in. And it was very meaningful to be able to do that, but also shocking, right? That's
my first reaction is like, well, how is that? That seems like one of those, like, there should be somebody in the government and I should be able to say to them, like, you had one job to do. And that's the job, is to figure out, like, how can we produce as many vaccinations as possible? And, you know, I could even see, like, okay, we're going to go with like a low risk, in terms of like production and turnaround time and this and that. And we're going to go with like a moonshot version and we're going to do everything.
Right. Balance out the portfolio. Right.
How did that not happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's one day someone will write the book, but I think everybody was so enamored with the mRNA technology, and it is an exciting technology. It has its weaknesses. The durability is not as great as we'd like it to be, and that's why you have.
You mean it has to be stored in like a refrigerator, that type
No,
of thing?
no,
or-
you have, well, the fact that it's not holding up in terms of durability of protection. That's why you have to have all these boosters.
I see. Okay.
all the time for reasons that we're just starting to find out now because of long-lasting plasma cells and that sort of thing. But that's right. I mean, it would have been great if we could have had that better balance. And it's at some point someone will dissect out how all those decisions were made but I mean, the U.S. It worked out because enough doses were just enough to be bought up by the U.S. and Canada and the U.K. and France and Western Europe and Japan, but there was no real true consideration for global health equity.
In the vaccine that you developed, is that a one and done, or is that do you have boosters for that, or you do it in a
It's
seasonal?
2 dose. So it's a recombinant protein made through an older process, the same process as the hepatitis B vaccine, a recombinant protein made through microbial fermentation and yeast. So it uses a big bioreactor. And this has been around 2 or 3 decades. It's used to make the hepatitis B vaccine. It's one of the lowest cost technologies out there, incredibly safe, simple refrigeration, great safety profile. So, when you start checking all the boxes on the checklist, it really is perfect for any country, but especially for low resource countries. Now we've just made the XBB booster version of it, a low cost XBB booster. So it costs around $3 a dose. And now we're doing this now for our other vaccines. We also have a whole portfolio of parasitic disease vaccines, like a new human hookworm vaccine. That's the project that I worked on as an MD PhD student in New York 40 years ago. Now, after 40 years, we're finally showed it's working. So that's very exciting.
And so, why wasn't there a decision to sort of like somewhere within the U.S. Federal government health apparatus to say like, okay, we have this problem, rightly or wrongly, that people are very suspicious of the mRNA vaccinations. We have this vaccination that has been administered to hundreds of millions of people around the globe. I'm speaking of the one that you helped develop. It's low cost, and we can bring it back here, open it up, and I don't know. I mean, why wouldn't they even just like distribute it through Medicare or and Medicaid? Like, I don't understand. Like, what is there anybody in our politics today that is attempting to do something like this? Do we have
we've been approached by Elizabeth Warren's people, Senator Warren of Massachusetts, Congresswoman Jayapal in Washington State, who wants to look into this and ask some of those questions. So I think people will start to look at it.
I mean, it seems sort of obvious to me.
Yeah.
In terms of like pushing back on this, like, lastly, like I know, like you suggest a sort of like a Southern Poverty Law Center for scientists in your book, which presumably would basically put some sunlight on the various anti-vaccination forces and maybe sort of like make more explicit the relationship between these sort of like the political entrepreneurs, as it were, in this space.
What's happening is, it's not only an attack on vaccine science or biomedical science, but it's also an attack on the scientists and portraying us as public enemies or enemies of the state. And that's where it gets really scary very fast. So the climate scientists have been dealing with this for a while.
I was just going to say, like, is there a model from them that you...
Yeah, well, actually, it's now I've teamed up with Michael Mann, as a professor at Penn, the one who just won the lawsuit against. So Michael and I are now partnering on a new book, which is going to be called Science Under Siege. and it compares and contrasts the attacks on biomedicine with the attacks on climate science. And it's the two circles of the Venn diagram are not 100% overlapping, but there's a significant amount of overlap, and sometimes coming from the same sources. So we're hoping that will shed some light on, how we manage this. In the case of the climate scientists, they've actually created a climate science legal defense fund, something like a Southern Poverty Law Center for the protection. I mean, I feel well supported by my bosses at Baylor College of Medicine, the Texas Children's Hospital. But if you're a more junior scientist or, mid-career scientist, if you don't get that support, it could be a very lonely and scary place when you're attacked, and hoping to create something for them to have a resource to go to. It's unfortunate that we're not our usual people that you'd expect to be helping us or not. I mean, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy is silent. PCAST, President's Council of Science Advisors, is silent. The Health and Human Services agencies don't say anything to support us or defend us. And most of the scientific societies are fairly silent because they just don't want to get.
Nobody wants to get into the fight.
Nobody get into a fight and get attacked. And part of their reasoning is interest. In some cases, they'll say, well, we have to be politically neutral, right? And because the only way to talk about this is talk about the partisan divide and the attack from the far right. They don't know how to manage that. But at some point, to paraphrase Desmond Tutu or Elie Wiesel, I have to say, if you're always neutral, it favors the aggressor, the tormentor, and that's what's happening as well. So we have to get comfortable talking about. It's kind of unprecedented. So I think everyone's playing catch up at this point.
Is the working? I've interviewed Michael Mann on this program probably, I don't know, half a dozen times over the years. I mean, because he was almost like the pioneer, at least one of the sort of the point people for getting attacked by science deniers in one shape or another. I imagine there were some folks, 50 years ago where, the cigarette manufacturers were doing this as well to specific doctors, maybe not, the doctors didn't have the same opportunity to communicate. Are you doing, like, the audience for this? Is it, there seems to me there's multiple audiences for, something that you and Mann would produce, right? I mean, one is the scientists, one is the policymakers, one is sort of like the culture and those people who report on it. Is there an internal apparatus to sort of say, like, we need to train scientists because it's no longer,
Well, there's multiple things. So you're asking all the right questions. I think one is, first of all, just describing the ecosystem is important because people aren't aware how extensive and pervasive it is, right? It's coming from, high net worth individuals. It's coming from political action committees. It's coming from the libertarian think tanks. These people are being recruited even from top universities to put out this stuff. It's coming from Elon Musk and Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. And it's being embraced at the highest levels of the U.S. government through the House Freedom Caucus, 2 U.S. senators. So I think, and then the national media and even the mainstream media. I mean, Fox News is probably one of the worst offenders, but even you're seeing more and more this kind of false equivalency spill into the Washington Post or the New York Times, basically talking about that the scientists could have made the COVID virus in the same breath that, there was zoonotic spillover, and it's not the case. And so there's a lot of education from the mainstream media that needs to be done. So I think, how you walk this back is complicated. And I think one is the scientific community needs to feel more comfortable doing public engagement. My friends at Research America, which is a policy group based in DC, do these studies every couple of years, and they're quite consistent. They basically say 3/4 of Americans at least cannot name a living scientist, and if they do, it's Bill Nye the Science Guy or Neil deGrasse Tyson, and nothing wrong with them. They're great people, but they're not what a typical working scientist does in terms of lab meetings and grants and major revisions over paper. So we're invisible. So that's partly our fault as a scientific community. And the universities tend not to like their docs and scientists speaking out because they're very risk averse. So how do we change that whole culture to make it feel more comfortable? I mean, I get told, for years, I would get told, or colleagues, now I have a little more freedom to do this, but for years is, hey, you're an academic, you're free to speak out whatever you want, ... but don't screw this up and get the institution in trouble. Well, of course, if you're out there enough and you're speaking out there enough, you will get the institution in trouble. And you need to know that you have that the institution has your back. And things are good at Baylor and Texas Children's, but others are not so forgiving. Then I think the other problem is we have the rapidly evaporating science journalists. We don't have science journalists anymore like we used to. So during the COVID pandemic, I had to spend a lot of time educating journalists without science backgrounds about COVID. And for the most part, they worked hard to get it right, but it was imperfect. So we need more science journalists. And then I think the big unknown is, though, how do we push back against the monster, this anti-science machine that's causing so much damage to the country, and that one, I think there I sort of give people the longest I don't know the answer to the question answers I think I've ever given. I think everybody's struggling with it at this point. I mean, Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, started this, and you talked about advisories with the social media companies, which is about the minimum thing the most innocuous thing you could say. But even then, now the Missouri Attorney General is suing him. There's a case going on in the Missouri Supreme Court, Missouri versus Murthy, basically saying we're not even allowed now to dismantle disinformation. So it's bad enough they're promoting disinformation, but now they're going to block any attempt to prevent you from going up against it. It's going to make it very difficult.
All right. Lastly, in terms of COVID, when you project forward thinking about COVID, aside from I would perceive it like growing, or at least the continuing sort of anti-vaccination, sort of like weaponization. Aside from that, when you look at the horizon here, in terms of COVID, what worries you the most? Is it like sort of the continuance of long COVID in some people? Is it the idea that we could have I don't know what you would call it, like a second order infection in the way that, shingles comes back from chickenpox 50 years later or something like that? Or is it a COVID mutating again in a way that becomes more virulent or problematic?
Well, I have both near-term and long-term worries. My near-term is, the good news right now, the numbers are starting to go down in terms of hospitalization. So I'm hoping the worst of this current JN.1 wave is over. But I think there's a high probability that another one will come up. Exactly which, I don't see any new variant becoming obvious, but I think, we have to assume there could be another one. And of course, people are done with boosters. I took my COVID annual immunization last fall. As I like to say, me and 6 other people did that. And
I was one of them.
But you get the idea. People are not accepted. So that's a big problem. And then the other problem is this. Remember, COVID-19, which is also called SARS-2, is the third major coronavirus pandemic we've had in this new century. So we had SARS, the original severe acute respiratory syndrome, in 2002. We've had MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, in 2012. That's why we began working on coronavirus vaccines, because we knew there'd be a third one. And sure enough, right on cue, COVID-19 appeared. But there's going to be a fourth one, most likely before the end of 2030. So we're seeing this cadence of every 6 to 7 years, a new major coronavirus pandemic, and no one's going to have an appetite to do much about it when it occurs. So that really concerns me as well, because this anti-science movement is so strong. So that's most likely what we're in for, and it's happening in part because of climate change. And this is why working with Michael is important, because of climate change. These are viruses that come from bats, and with warming temperatures and altered rainfall pattern, bats are flying to new places, seeking new food habitats. They're coming closer into contact with people. There's increasing urbanization and deforestation, so people are having more contacts with bats. This explains not only the rise of coronaviruses, but why we've had 2 major Ebola epidemics in 2014 and 2019. These are also Ebola or filoviruses that come from bats. So we are in this new normal. As I say, we're going to see a regular cadence of catastrophic pandemic threats, and that's why we have a White House Office of Pandemics now to look at that. But I worry. I mean, I think the good news is I think we can make vaccines pretty rapidly against a lot of these, but we still have the issues of equity, and we still have the reality now that there's so much pushback now against vaccines or any other kind of interventions. That's going to make it very tough.
Dr. Peter Hotez, Dean for the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine and author of your most recent, The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, A Scientist's Warning. Thanks so much for your time today. We'll put a link to that book at majority.fm and in our podcast and YouTube description. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sam. This was great. I really appreciated the opportunity.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break here and head into the fun half. I want to know if, and I probably should have asked him this, but can we try and vaccinate the bats? Can we get not obviously we can't vaccinate the bats, but I've heard of experiments with Lyme disease where they've or maybe is it Lyme or rabies, where they have tried to sort of put entities into the wild. I don't know what it would be, that food supplies or something like that, and try and inoculate certain species from this stuff. And I don't know. Maybe you can get rid of the bats.
I don't know.
I think it's unlikely.
Lyme disease, wasn't it the Pentagon was investigating whether it was an escaped bioweapon? Is that what you're thinking of?
No.
That was in 2019. They were looking into that.
I did not know that. No.
I don't know if anything came of that, but.
Oh, yeah. Comtree says all we need to do is vaccinate.
Yeah, let's send a bunch of humans into bad habitats. I'm sure it's going to be with syringes.
Well, there was one flaw with the plan. Oh, we could vaccinate the bats with bleach. All right, I realized open up the floodgates. Wasn't there something with mosquitoes? Yes, there was something with mosquitoes. There was something that would sterilize mosquitoes or something and make them hard to reproduce or something to that effect. But I don't know.
Let's just figure out Ozempic.
Yeah, let's just do that. Everybody's on Ozempic, so at least.
We look great. We're all sick as hell.
Folks, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can allow this show to survive and thrive by becoming a supporting member. Go to jointhemajorityreport.com. And when you do, you not only get the free show free of commercials, you get the fun half. You can IM. I sent out an email this morning giving you an extra 5% off Cedar Seeds. So if you're a member, you get 20% off at Cedar Seeds right now. But you got to open up that email that we sent you. cedarseeds.com. It's spring. Now's the time. Get your little seedling trays out, plant your seeds, and you move them to a bigger thing when they get a little bit bigger. Then you sex them and then have yourself some fun.
Yeah, don't forget that part.
Yep. Some of us forgot. Some of us forgot and then became seed magnets. And folks, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. And you have only days now to get out the Voight. That's right. When you walk around with a Majority Report shirt of the limited edition Get Out the Voight shirt, it's not just a t-shirt, folks. It's not just an American-made union printed shirt. It's also a conversation starter. So if you're someone who is, you don't know how to start a conversation with folks, This is great. Like, what? Get out the void. What is that about?
If somebody wears on a date, do let us know how it goes.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great way if you're not sure of like the political leanings of somebody and you want to like this little test, but you don't want to come across as being like too aggressive or adamant. This is the best way to do it. Get out the void. Bradley, ESVN, what are we going to do?
Well, most likely I think we will record on Thursday because Emma is still on vacation today. We'll record Thursday afternoon at 4 p.m., barring any unforeseen circumstances or complications. And we'll probably break down a lot of the NFL free agency goings on now that the week has started for signings and things like that. So youtube.com/ESPN show for that, as well as you can check out some of our clips in our prior streams as well.
Matt,
Left Reckoning, we returned for a bonus show yesterday, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, where we had Lainey Newman on, who was on here about a month and a half ago, the co-author with Theda Scotch-Paul about Rust Belt Union Blues. We talk about why it's important to cultivate a electorate that will support these things and not just rely on unions as a Rolodex for campaign time. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning is a good talking with Lainey.
646-257-3920 is the number. We will take your phone calls a little bit later in the program. Again, if you're a member, log into the app. The app is free for everybody at majorityapp.com. And you can IM the show, and I will read your IMs, at least some of yours, because I can't read all 5,000 that we get every day. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy.
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them, just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black.